Welcome back to the Straight Up Fight Network. And this is a video or a podcast that I really didn't plan on doing about the Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul fight. Because for a guy who follows combat sports pretty closely, this is it's sort of a given that Jake Paul is going to win. Because if you're someone who follows the MMA sphere, and you're a real mixed martial arts fan who also watches big boxing fights, like a lot of us are. A lot of us are, we're maybe boxing fans who got converted over to MMA because there are better fights, and you get to see more different types of skills, a wider range of skills. It's not just the boxing, you also get the kicking, you also get the jiu-jitsu and the wrestling. So there's so many disciplines in one. It makes for very interesting, very entertaining fights in the UFC, and also the matchmaking, the constant competition, the fighters being evenly matched against each other so that you don't frequently know who's going to win and who's going to lose. There's usually no A side and B side. So there are a lot of reasons why people who may have started as boxing fans have been converted over to MMA fans with the way Dana White runs the company of the UFC. So what you have is a lot of people in the MMA camp who just see it as a foregone conclusion that Jake Paul's going to win the fight because Jake Paul is the younger fighter. At this point, he's the better fighter. He's the better boxer. And Mike Tyson is 57 years old or 60 years old or 62. I've heard different reports of how old he is. I haven't bothered looking into it. He's at least 57 years old, and he's about 30 years older than Jake Paul no matter which way you slice it. So I think to the standard MMA fan, that's really the only way to look at the fight. So when I saw this fight come out, I thought maybe it was a smart fight for Jake Paul and a smart cash grab for Mike Tyson as well, but I didn't really think I would be making a video out of it. Now, why am I doing this episode here? It's because as I've started to hear the different rumblings, there are essentially three different camps that I believe the audience or the potential audience who are going to watch this fight are split into. And those three camps are the MMA fan, the boxing fan, and then the layman. So starting off with the MMA fan who is not way into the, you know what, let's do it the other way. Let's do the boxing fan first. You have the boxing fan, or you have someone who actually boxes, a real boxer. They believe that Mike Tyson is going to win because they don't view Jake Paul as a real boxer. They view Jake Paul as a jungle fight sort of guy who will step in and he'll make crazy fights. He'll do fights against Ben Askren, who's not a boxer, fights against very low-level boxers like the last couple of guys who he beat, guys who are well past their prime, guys who aren't in as good shape as he is. But when he fights against a real boxer or someone who's sort of a real boxer like Tommy Fury, who also did reality television shows, he loses. Right? He lost that fight to Tommy Fury. And if he were to fight a real champion-level boxer, of course, he would lose. So the boxing community doesn't give Jake Paul the credence that he would like to have. So you have the boxing community who views this as, doesn't really matter how old Mike Tyson is. Mike Tyson was a real fighter, and when you watch him and what he's doing on the pads, when you watch him hitting the bags, he has that muscle memory in him, and he has that killer Mike inside of him, where he's going to still be coming for Jake Paul in a very, very aggressive and violent way, and he's going to win the fight. And that's just the way the boxers and the boxing community sees it. Then you have the MMA community. And the MMA community isn't really so sentimental about the sanctity of boxing, and they aren't really sentimental about the old Mike Tyson, because as MMA fans, we kind of are more in line with that things don't usually end well. And we know that anyone who fights long enough ends up getting beat. And the MMA fans aren't really tied into, oh, well, Mike Tyson is a boxer and Jake Paul isn't. We don't really care. The MMA fan just watches and says, when you're out of it, when you're at past your prime and you have another guy, it doesn't really matter. We've seen this so many times, right? We've seen when Tyron Woodley was the dominant champion and he won several fights in a row looking really, really good. When he got past it, tons of guys just started whooping him, and it wasn't close. Right when Kamaru Usman looked like he was slightly past the hill, that was it. He was not the same guy in the second Leon Edwards fight that he was once he got cracked with that kick. And there's a million examples in MMA of guys who are going one trajectory and then Tony Ferguson. He hits the wall. He takes that beating against Justin Gaethje, and now he goes totally the other direction. He comes back down from goes from the eight. Let's say it was 8 fights in a row. I don't remember how many fights he actually won. Was it 10 or 11? Somewhere between 8 and 11 fights in a row. And then he loses 6 or 7 fights in a row after that. After he hits the wall and starts to come down on the other side. And it's going to be the same thing here. This is the way the MMA fan views it. Jake Paul is in his prime. Jake Paul is on the way up. Jake Paul, although he was originally a reality YouTuber, reality video, Vine star, now he is a boxer. And it doesn't matter that Mike Tyson was champion of the world 30 years ago. Jake Paul is in prime shape right now, and Jake Paul is taking it seriously, so Jake Paul is going to knock Mike Tyson out. And frankly, for Jake Paul, the best thing that he can possibly do is knock Mike Tyson out in one round, because Jake Paul is predicated on name recognition. He's predicated on views. And the virality that you can reach by knocking Mike Tyson out inside of one round, stepping in with him, and then just immediately going after him and knocking him out cold, that is the way to the most viral KO. And that is the way of boxing and MMA today. Is you want the virality. You want the spinning wheel kick knockout. You want the Joaquin Buckley spinning kick to the head. You want the flying knee to the face out cold. That is what you want. You want what Jake Paul has been doing. He's been posterizing guys. He's been stepping in with them, and very, very quickly, uppercut puts him out cold. Right hand knocks Tyron Woodley completely unconscious. Anthony Joshua totally knocks Francis Ngannou out cold, and he's a meme. It's this meme culture. So what would work out best for Jake Paul would be if he could do that to Mike Tyson and just put him out very, very, very quickly. So there's Camp A is the sanctity of boxing camp. They believe that Mike Tyson is definitely going to beat Jake Paul because he's not a real boxer. That's the way they view it. Then you have the MMA community, who is not quite as sentimental towards the sanctity of boxing, and they view it as the guy who is, and this is majority. We're talking largely consensus, although there are always going to be some dissenters in the minority. But the majority are boxing community views it as Mike Tyson's going to win. MMA community views it as Jake Paul is going to win because he's younger and he's in his prime and he's taking it seriously. And then you have the third camp, which is the layman. And the layman consists of people who remember Mike Tyson from when he was the champion, because Mike Tyson transcended the sport of boxing. And back then, boxing was more popular anyway. Everyone really watched the big fights. Mike Tyson was beyond the fame of just combat sports. He was actually one of the most famous people in the world. And there was a lot of intrigue. He was so violent, and he just got everyone behind him. And look at how he was in The Hangover. He was on Oprah. He was famous for biting off his opponent's ear. I mean, there's been a million reasons why Mike Tyson was so famous and so captivating. So when you think back to that, when the average person who isn't a real fight fan but watched these big Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson boxing events from years and years and years ago, they still fall back into their childhood thoughts and the sentimentality of Mike Tyson and remembering what he was, and then they see him in a short clip on YouTube of what he is now, or something on Facebook or a short or a TikTok, and you see that and you say, oh my God, Mike Tyson is still that killer. So we don't really know too much about Jake Paul, and despite the fact that we hear good things, Mike Tyson is the killer, and he's going to come for Jake Paul, and it's Mike Tyson is still going to win. So there you have the three camps. So this makes for an extremely interesting fight. Why? Because from a promotion standpoint, what you have is every type of person in the world is interested in this fight. Where you have this, every type of person, let me try to break it down step by step. Every type of person is interested in this fight because the MMA fan is interested, because Jake Paul has fought a million MMA guys, beaten all of them, and he's already garnered interest. Now, the young kid of today is interested in Jake Paul because they followed Jake Paul through Vine and YouTube, and he has a lot of the youth behind him. He's also been involved with KSI and all of this whole new YouTube generation. So the young generation likes him. The old generation is going to watch this fight because of Mike Tyson, because they're sentimental about Mike. So And then the boxing community is going to watch it because of Mike Tyson and because Jake Paul was trying to fight against the boxer and knock him out. So you have literally every camp going to tune in, and that's going to sell massive pay-per-views. So it's a stroke of genius by Jake Paul and by Mike Tyson to put this fight on, because they are getting every single type of person in the world to be interested in a boxing match. Because on one side you have Mike Tyson, who encompasses boxing fans, who encompasses the average person, and who encompasses the old timers. And then you have Jake Paul, who encompasses the young generation, Generation Z, maybe the whatever generation it is before them, and the YouTube generation, and also MMA fans who had to go watch Tyron Woodley get knocked out. You have the basketball fans who had to watch Nate Robinson get knocked out, and then you have the MMA fans who had to watch him drop Anderson Silva. You had to have the MMA fans watch him drop Nate Diaz. So every single camp is going to be tuning in to watch this fight. It's going to be mega successful. It's going to sell a ton of pay-per-views. And ultimately, you can also look at it from a risk perspective, risk versus reward. Mike Tyson has nothing to lose. So you might say that Mike Tyson can go into this and just fight freely and go after Jake Paul, whereas Jake Paul has the nerves and he basically is forced to win. But then again, Mike Tyson, the first big shot he takes, he probably will say, that's all. I'm a 60-year-old man. What do I need this for? I already got the payday that I wanted. I stepped into the ring. We achieved our goal. We're selling millions of pay-per-views, so we're really good to go. I don't know the exact pay-per-view numbers. I don't know if 1 million is really achievable, but whatever that high number is, he's going to get very much more wealthier from this fight. And Jake Paul, on the other hand, he needs the victory, because if he loses to a 60-year-old Mike Tyson, that's basically it. You cannot say that you are going to continue trying to actually fight real boxers. You couldn't even beat a guy who hasn't been a real boxer in about 25 to 30 years, or whatever the exact amount is. It's definitely multiple decades since Mike Tyson has been a real fighter. Now, I'm sure that Mike Tyson is also on PEDs. I'm sure that he's on testosterone or something that should really be illegal in a combat sports fight, but Jake Paul doesn't care, because anything that he can do to ensure that Mike Tyson will get in the ring and that Mike Tyson will be able to put out these videos where he looks good on the pads and he looks good hitting the heavy bag and he looks good training, that is what will generate interest in the fight, because people see these clips and they say, oh my God, this is the same old Mike Tyson, even though it's obviously not. No man at the age of 60 is like the champion that he was in his 20s. That's just absolutely ridiculous. Of course that's not the case. But it's enough footage when amplified by testosterone and amplified by PEDs, it's enough footage to make the person who remembers Mike Tyson from yesteryear think that version of Mike Tyson is still there today. So it's an absolute stroke of genius putting this fight together. You're going to get everyone watching it. And two of the three camps, the boxing community and the layman community, the average person, are going to believe that Mike Tyson is going to win, and the MMA fan is going to believe that Jake Paul will win. And I am a boxing fan, but I'm also an MMA fan, so that puts me in the camp of thinking that Jake Paul is going to win, and I even think that Jake Paul might knock him out inside of one round. And I could say that I'm just viewing it in a realistic view, and that's what I see happening. But whether I like it or not, I'm included in the MMA camp where I watch UFC pretty religiously. I'm watching almost every single UFC event, unless I can't be home at that time and I have a big event going on in my life where I need to go somewhere with the family. I'm watching ESPN Plus every Saturday night. I'm watching the pay-per-views. So that is the camp that I am in. So I can say that I'm unbiased, but I kind of fall into the same path that most MMA fans are. Now, you can make a case that the MMA fans are the least biased because we don't have the sanctity of boxing that we care about, because we just care about combat sports as a whole. And we believe that anyone can go fight anyone. And if you are someone who is even okay with the influencer boxing, then yeah, it's just a fist fight. So there's no sentimentality towards anybody, and everyone will get beat at a certain age. I think that's really the realistic way of looking at it, that the older guy is at a severe disadvantage, Whereas, yeah, maybe you have an Anderson Silva who stood a chance against Jake Paul, but Anderson Silva, I believe, was only in his 40s. I don't think he was in his 50s. I don't think he was 60, and he still moved a lot better than Mike Tyson is going to move. He still has a lot of his elusivity and his ability to move back and forth and his quick twitch fiber, and I'm sure that maybe Anderson Silva was on something also. He's done that throughout his career as well. But here, it just seems like it's really, really too far past the prime of Mike Tyson to really think that he's going to beat even a guy like Jake Paul. But I think Jake Paul is the real deal. I think that Jake Paul can really give it a go against a lot of real boxers. And as he continues, he's being smart. He realized that, hey, his path to making a lot of money isn't taking the toughest fights. He was taking tougher fights before. He was taking fights that, again, like the Anderson Silva fight was a tougher fight than the last several fights he's fought. I'd love to pull up just to see what the last several fights were for Jake Paul. If we can see Jake Paul, I'm just going to try to do this quickly, but I'd love to see Jake Paul box rec. Let's see if we can just see the box rec of Jake Paul. What do we have here? So going from the beginning, he fought Anisin Gibb, and that was just a total mismatch where Jake Paul was way heavier than Gibb, but they were both totally raw. So yes, Jake Paul disposed of him. Jake Paul knocked out Nate Robinson, the basketball player who hadn't fought any fights in his career. Then Jake Paul viciously knocked out Ben Askren, who was a horrendous striker for his whole career. Then Jake Paul fought to a split decision victory against Tyron Woodley, and then fought Tyron Woodley again. It was a slow fight. It wasn't that interesting until Jake Paul landed a killer right hand and knocked him out cold. Then Jake Paul fought a pretty good fight against Anderson Silva, where it was a close fight, and I was actually at that fight in person with my wife at Gila River Arena in Glendale, Arizona. That was phenomenal. It was really an exciting fight to watch, but Jake Paul put Anderson Silva down in the 8th round, and he looked really good doing so. Then Jake Paul had the split decision loss to Tommy Fury, so say for it what you will. And then Jake Paul had a unanimous decision against Nate Diaz, where Nate was picking it up with his volume, but overall Jake Paul was landing much better shots and turning over his punches like a boxer, whereas Nate Diaz has been so used to fighting in other disciplines for his entire career. It's just really hard for a guy like Nate, even with the cardio advantage. And yes, had that fight gone on for another 4 or 5 rounds, would that have boded well? Would that have boded well for Nate? Of course. The longer the fight is, the better it is for Nate. And over time, Nate will start to do better and better and better. But in that discipline, there are just facets of boxing that Nate hasn't done for his entire career. So whereas if there was any MMA component there, of course Nate would kill Jake Paul. That's not even a question. On the ground, in the wrestling, in the dirty boxing, in the clinch, with the knees, with the submissions, like it wouldn't even be a question that Nate would win. But in this boxing, Jake Paul had a lot more experience than Nate Diaz did. Nate just walked into his first fight against a bigger, stronger fighter who had more experience than him. So, hey, Jake Paul got the victory. Then Jake Paul took his 2 easiest fights, which I would say are Andre August and Ryan Borland. These two were, if you watch those fights, they were just pathetic. They were Jake Paul getting a knockout in the first round of each of those fights. Right? It was at 2 minutes 32 seconds against Andre August and 2 minutes 37 seconds against Ryan Borland. Right? I believe both of those were in the first round. I could be mistaken. Maybe one of them was in the second round, but who really cares? It doesn't. Oh, so it looks like the Ryan Borland fight was. I don't even know. It doesn't. I thought it was in the first round, if I'm remembering correctly. Maybe it was in the second round, but I got to be honest, I wasn't paying such close attention to the Ryan Borland fight because it just seems like it was another cash grab, gimme easy fight where Jake Paul is billing it as, hey, I'm going up against a real boxer, so have to give me credence for fighting real boxers. But yeah, this guy wasn't really fighting. Like, I never heard of Ryan Borland. I never really heard of Andre August. So why should I really be paying too much attention? It was what it was. We expected Jake Paul to go in there and knock them out, and he did that. So that was kind of the case there. So what you have here is even better than the influencer boxing fights, where influencer boxing was tapping into something and is still tapping into something where you have very popular guys amongst the youngsters. So youngsters are interested in seeing, hey, can this guy Sneeko, and I don't even know most of these guys, but Sneeko, I don't know what he's famous for. Can he fight against KSI? And I don't know if they actually fought each other, but just for example, I didn't know who KSI was before the influencer boxing. I knew Jake Paul. I mean, I heard of Jake Paul. I think I really heard of Logan Paul first. But I didn't know who KSI was. I didn't know who Neeson Gibb was. I didn't know who Sneeko was. And I know who Sneeko is by face now, just from seeing him go make his rounds in the MMA community. But I didn't know who any of these guys were. But who is interested in these fights? It's it's the young people, the really, really, really young generation. And I'm pretty young. I'm not even 30 years old yet. But I'm almost 30, but the really the younger generation, I would say, I guess maybe 27 and younger, they're really interested in these fights between these freak fights between just random people, YouTubers, entertainers. But this fight is even better than that, because this doesn't just interest the super young Generation Z and those type of the 27 and younger. This interests the 60 and older, the 80-year-olds who remember Mike Tyson are interested in this fight. I don't know if they'll know how to buy the pay-per-view, but or Netflix or whatever it's on. I don't know if they'll know how to stream it, but they will have at least a fringe interest in this. And the 60-year-olds and the 50-year-olds and the 40-year-olds and the 30-year-olds. And then because of Jake Paul, the 25-year-olds, the 20-year-olds, and the 15-year-olds will also be interested. Every single person in the world is interested in this fight, and that's going to make it extremely interesting. I see Jake Paul winning inside of one round by KO or by a couple of knockdowns, and then they say, hey, that's it, ball game over, and they're going to call the fight. But hey, I'm in the MMA camp, so of course that is what I believe, in line with most of the other MMA fans out there. This is the Straight Up Fight Network.